Hello, my name is Dale O'Neill. I'm an attorney, and I have over 30 years of courtroom experience. I have 30 years experience of listening to witnesses, to testimony, and to evidence. 30 years experience of cross-examination. And today I want us together to look at the evidence and the testimony and the witnesses of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And I'm doing this because sometimes some people wonder if the crucifixion really took place. They wonder if the crucifixion was an actual historical event that can be proven. And as a trial attorney, I think it can be proven. The best way to prove something, in my opinion, is to get other witnesses, disinterested witnesses, witnesses with nothing to gain, nothing to lose. The writers of the New Testament talk about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and they specifically talk about specific events that occurred at the moment, at the time of the crucifixion. There are three major events that occurred at the crucifixion that can be proven by non-Christian sources. The first is darkness covering the land. The Gospels say that at the time of the crucifixion, the sun no longer shined. It was dark throughout the land. Well, living at that time was a famous historian, a historian whose works has endured the ages. His name was Thallus. He wrote a history beginning with the Trojan War and going up through his lifetime, going through the year 52 AD. In other words, his writings concluded within 52 years of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In the historical writings of Thallus, who was not a Christian, he very plainly and accurately describes the sun went dark. In fact, his words were that there was a darkness across the land. In his history, he goes on to describe the second event that gives proof and credibility to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Thallus, this secular historian, wrote at the same time that the sun went dark, that there were earthquakes throughout the land. He described them as earthquakes so strong, so violent, that rocks were rent, rocks were broken in two. The New Testament Gospels also tell the same story. Therefore, the lawyer in me concludes they must be telling the truth. They didn't compare notes. They're not on the same team. One is Christian, the other is non-Christian, secular. And there's no evidence that they ever met each other, but there's overwhelming evidence that they tell the same story. The third great event that happened at the time of the crucifixion was the tearing of the veil in the temple. And you must understand this veil was something described throughout the Bible, made of heavy, heavy cloth. And this veil was hung to separate everyone from the inner workings. Only one person was allowed to go inside the temple and to pass under the veil. And that was the high priest, and he was only allowed to do it one day of the year. So this veil was something of huge importance to the Jews and the Jewish tradition living at the time of the crucifixion. The New Testament Gospels are very clear that at the time of the crucifixion, the veil was torn in two. But what's more important is the veil was torn from top to bottom. Now, if a man tore that veil, he'd begin at the bottom, and he would tear upwards. But the New Testament Gospels say that the veil was torn in two, beginning at the top and torn to the bottom. Well, once again, we have another secular historian that was a contemporary of the time of the crucifixion of Jesus, and his work still exists to this day. He's a very, very famous historian. In fact, you can go to the local bookstore and find his books still available. His name was Josephus. He was renowned throughout the world and is still revered today for his historical accuracy. Josephus went into great detail about the veil. His records showed that the veil was massive. It was blue in color and ornately decorated. So there's no doubt about this veil. There's no doubt it existed. The historian Josephus describes in detail the color of the veil, the dimensions of the veil, the weight of the veil, and the decorations on this veil. Josephus also discusses the timing of the rending of the veil. He describes it as during the Passover period of time, and that's very important because at the Passover, all the Jews without the land would come to the temple, And the Passover was an extremely important time in the life of a typical Jew of that period of time, because that's the time, the one day of the year, the one time of the year, that the high priest could go behind the veil and into the Holy of Holies and burn incense. And the veil was very important, very symbolic throughout the Jewish culture, because the veil symbolized the sin that separated man from God. So this veil stood between man and God. Therefore, at the Passover, every eye would be on that veil, and at the Passover, there would be thousands of people, thousands of Jewish people, who would come from far and wide just to be at the temple for Passover as part of their culture. But it gets better than that. Not only did Josephus, a famous historian, describe the rending of the veil, but we have two other sources that describe the rending of the veil. The Roman historian Tacitus, and it's important to emphasize that he was Roman because the Roman Empire rejected Jesus and rejected Christianity. But the Roman historian Tacitus recorded in his writings the rending of the veil. His writings still exist to this day. But we have a third source, a very important source, that talks about the rending of the veil. And in this third source, there can be no doubt. The Jewish Talmud itself describes this as a great catastrophe. So now I'll let you decide. Do you think the crucifixion of Jesus Christ was an actual event that happened? Now, in my opinion, there can be no doubt. Because not only do we have the Bible, the New Testament, and the authors of the New Testament describing it in detail, but we have several sources who rejected Christianity, and in fact they were opposed to Christianity. However, they tell the same story as the New Testament authors. So these people that rejected Christianity, rejected the crucifixion, and rejected the resurrection tell the same stories as the authors of the New Testament. As a trial lawyer, I can reach only one conclusion. When all of these people, from different sources, with different objectives, all tell the same story, I believe it. Well, I hope you have a great day, and I hope this has been a blessing. God bless you.